Okay, I unmute myself. Can everybody hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Yes, I would really love to be in Göttingen right now at the moment, especially hearing all about social curiosity now, and I'm missing out basically on all the social interactions at the moment happening in Göttingen and all the gossip that might be going on during the coffee break. So yeah, I learned a lot already this morning. Very exciting workshop. I'm happy to speak to you today. One caveat, though, is in my talk, I won't be necessarily speaking directly about social curiosity. It will be about epistemic curiosity. So the title of my talk is How Epistemic Curiosity Actually Affects Learning and Information Seeking via the Dopaminergic Circuit. And then, of course, we can discuss during the question time, maybe there are actually similar mechanisms for social curiosity that we see in epistemic curiosity. So I probably don't need to tell this audience a lot about why curiosity is important and that it's a fundamental aspect of learning, but it is poorly understood. And we know about the importance of curiosity in our daily lives, but we really have a very limited theoretical understanding of curiosity. And part of that is because there hasn't been really like a literature, a research field of curiosity, which is now starting to develop, which I think is really exciting. And one thing that I find really fascinating by studying curiosity, it's not just to understand the concept of curiosity and how it affects learning and memory, it's also that it might help to optimize learning in applied settings, like in clinical settings or in educational settings. So the research vision basically in my group at the moment is really the long-term research vision is really to understand the mechanism underlying curiosity and curiosity-based learning, and to understand the individual differences. As we all know, there are many individual differences in curiosity and how that changes across the lifespan, and hopefully then to translate these more basic research findings into applied settings. So I'm trying today to show you for each of these points, basically one data set, how we're trying to achieve this. So if you go online and think about curiosity, whenever you want to start a talk on curiosity, you can find hundreds of quotes online by philosophers about curiosity, by Albert Einstein and so on. My favorite quote, actually, for me as a learning and memory researcher more traditionally, is actually by Nobel laureate John O'Keefe, who speculated the following about curiosity. He said in 1993, he said, "Nature appears to have taken an extraordinary gamble. The acquisition of information for its own sake, curiosity may confer biological advantage." And going even further back in time to 1978, when John O'Keefe, together with Lynn Nadell, wrote The Hippocampus as a Cognitive Map, which is like a landmark book in terms of memory circuits and to understand and basically proposing ideas about the hippocampus. They also said that they dedicate a whole chapter on exploration, where they also talk about curiosity, where they say the preference for novelty over familiar situations reflects the predominant response of curiosity over fear. So when we started, basically, our research on curiosity coming more from the learning and memory side and thinking about curiosity as one part, as an intrinsic motivator to increase learning and memory, we found the following things. So we were interested in that idea, basically, how curiosity might affect dopaminergic circuit functions based on previous proposals, and how it basically then enhances encoding of curiosity target information, and how the hippocampus is involved in that. And when we started this line of research in 2014, we basically found that curiosity really activates the dopaminergic circuit. So in this study, we found that key areas of the dopaminergic circuit, the SNVTA in the midbrain, which is the release of the area which releases dopamine to the circuit, and also one important output area, the nucleus accumbens. Both areas show a linear increase with curiosity ratings. And further on, we showed basically that when participants are in a curiosity state, it also activates activity within the hippocampus, and that predicts the curiosity-related memory enhancements. So then we thought a little bit further then, and actually, okay, we know now that the dopaminergic circuit affects hippocampus-dependent learning and enhanced consolidation of curiosity target information. But actually, how does it all start? What are the elicitors of curiosity? And what we did there, we looked through the literature and did basically our research on all the theories of curiosity that are out there in psychology, and try to synthesize these theories on curiosity in psychology with what we know about neural mechanisms in terms of learning and memory and motivation. And we came up with this framework here, the prediction, appraisal, curiosity, and exploration framework, or short, the PACE framework. And in this framework, really the idea is to have a guidance, basically, where to look, where to start doing research on curiosity. Is it on the elicitors? Is it what curiosity is, or is it actually what curiosity then, how curiosity affects cognition? So we can look at different steps and multiple levels of analysis. And the two elicitors that we came up with in this model are basically based, the first one in the hippocampus and the anterior cingulate cortex. So it's really trying to bring the psychological processes that are theorized about curiosity together with specific brain circuits. So the first one here on the left-hand side, coded by the hippocampus, are that we call context-based prediction errors. And this is really what, for example, John O'Keefe and Leonard L. laid out in their book, and that has been shown over and over in animal research as well, and in human research, that the hippocampus really is a novelty detector. It really is like this mismatch system to detect novel information or unexpected context changes in the environment. So in this way, we want to put really the hippocampus as a core brain area that potentially elicits curiosity. That's what we at least speculate. And then on the other hand, the anterior cingulate cortex, or short the ACC, which codes the detection of information gaps, or so-called information-based prediction error due to cognitive conflict. So this is based on what we think, what we know from research, what the anterior cingulate cortex does to detect cognitive conflict and to act upon it, but also in terms of the psychological theories on curiosity, that it really codes these information gaps that might elicit curiosity. But one further step, basically, then in this model is that it's not driven by like whenever you encounter a prediction error in the environment, that this leads to an obligatory drive of curiosity, that there has to be some appraisal or some evaluation component in between that appraises that information gap or prediction error. And this could be coded by more lateral prefrontal cortex structures. And there's a lot of that, of course, in there, which is trying to be more specific about what this appraisal process means and what types of different motives play a role there. And it also comes down here a lot to individual differences, to different coping strategies, right? Can you cope when you encounter a prediction error? Can you cope with that new information? Or because it might be too difficult or too overwhelming. And then that's what we thought in this model. A prediction error could also lead to anxiety. For example, if you don't have the coping strategies or the cognitive resources to process this new information, this might lead to anxiety and to behavioral inhibition, that you're actually not interested and you actually withdraw from that prediction error, from that novelty response. Or on the other hand, it elicits curiosity, different flavors of curiosity, and then it affects basically that, it triggers activity within the dopaminergic circuit. It might trigger further exploration and information seeking about that information. And then basically the hippocampus basically plays a part in learning that information better. And then the cycle could be closed and curiosity could be satisfied. But you could also think then that once you hear the specific information, or you hear more about this information, actually this again elicits a prediction error coded by the hippocampus and or the anterior cingulate cortex. And then this cycle basically starts all over again. So today I would like to show you 3 data sets asking the following 3 questions. The first one would be, how do individual differences with an intrinsic functional connectivity in the brain predict curiosity-enhanced memory? The second one would be about development. How does curiosity affect memory in children? And the third question is, how does curiosity influence information seeking and exploration? So let's start with the first question about individual differences in curiosity-enhanced memory. And this was spearheaded by Katrin Eschmann in the lab, who's currently a DFG fellow in my group, together with Ash Valji, who used to be a PhD student in my group. So this is a study on individual differences where participants took part in the trivia paradigm. I will show you the details of the trivia paradigm in a minute, behaviorally outside the scanner, but then also these participants took part in a brain imaging scan for 10 minutes where we recorded resting state fMRI. So we really want to see now whether there's anything in the resting state data in terms of these brain circuits that could be important for curiosity, that could predict behavior within the trivia paradigm, or could predict behavior, could predict the curiosity-enhanced memory effects. So the trivia paradigm goes like this. Maybe some of you in the room might be already familiar with it, probably some not. So we always start this paradigm with the screening phase. And in this screening phase, participants see a pool of different trivia questions that we're hoping to elicit different levels of curiosity with these trivia questions. So for example, what does the term dinosaur actually mean? Participants then give a confidence response and a curiosity response, for example, on a scale from 1 to 6. If a participant indicates that they know the answer to a trivia questions by indicate, for example, a 6 or even a 5, we don't take this question further. So we only want to then in the actual experiment want to use trivia questions where they don't know the answer, basically then with different degrees of curiosity, where I showed you before then that the dopaminergic circuit shows like this linear increase in terms of like activity within the dopaminergic circuit based on low to high curiosity. And then in the actual experiment, in the encoding phase, we show a subset of these trivia questions again. For example, what does the term dinosaur actually mean? Participants anticipate the potential answer. And then after a short anticipation period, we show them the correct answer, terrible lizard. And then also we ask them how interesting they actually found the answer. So you could think about situations where you might not be very curious about what the term dinosaur actually means. You might think, like, oh, maybe it is probably some Greek or Latin word. I don't really know. But then once you see the answer, terrible lizard, you think, like, oh, actually, that's kind of cool. That's kind of interesting. So in these cases, your initial curiosity was actually quite low, but then you actually found the answer quite interesting. So we can look at basically pre-answer curiosity and post-answer interest. And what we can do with these two ratings, and this was an approach spearheaded by Caroline Marvin at Columbia University together with Daphna Shohami, is to calculate a so-called information prediction error, where you really take the difference between post-answer interest minus the pre-answer curiosity. And we can see whether these effects actually, like your expected curiosity, compared to what actually, how surprising the information was, actually has different effects on memory. And it has been shown that it actually has different independent effects on memory. And this is what we found in this first experiment, first behaviorally, replicating previous studies. So in terms of the curiosity-related memory effect, we find that answers that are associated with high curiosity questions are better remembered compared to answers that are associated with low curiosity. And this is a really, really robust effect, really strong. Many studies have shown that effect. It's also not that surprising, actually. The more surprising thing is, or like the more interesting thing is, when, okay, what are actually then the neural mechanisms that drive this effect? But you can also see there's lots of individual variability. So some people show a very large difference. Some people don't show that much of a difference in that effect. And that's what we will be capitalizing on in this study on individual differences. And then we can also look at the IPE, the information prediction error related memory. And again, we find the same thing that has been shown in a few studies beforehand, that answers that are associated with a positive information prediction error, so the information was more interesting than you initially thought, is better remembered compared to answers with no information prediction error or even a negative prediction error. And here you can see again, there's lots of individual variability again in these measures across our AT participants where we analyzed the data. So then what Katrin asked is basically, said like, okay, well then let's take the PACE framework to the test. And actually let's look only at these brain areas that were suggested to be important for curiosity within the PACE framework and run some resting state functional connectivity analysis. So what we found, and it's basically an analysis where we basically threw all these ROIs, all these brain areas in there, corrected for multiple comparisons corrections for all the different seeds and ROIs we had, and basically asked, like, is there anything in these areas that would predict the curiosity and the IPE related memory enhancement? And what we found was the following. So first of all, in these two, in this connection between basically the key circuit within the dopaminergic circuit, where I showed you beforehand that it's coding curiosity states, the midbrain and the nucleus accumbens, we found basically a positive correlation with the curiosity enhanced memory effect. So you see that for different hemispheres with the right nucleus accumbens, ones with the left VTA here, and here with the right VTA. And we basically see here these two areas, the functional connectivity in these two areas predicts the curiosity enhanced memory. So in other words, the more somebody shows a resting state functional connection between these areas within the dopaminergic circuit, the better their memory enhancement is based on curiosity. And when we look at IPE related memory, we don't see anything like this. So we see a dissociation here. There's no modulation. But then if we look further, there's also another connection that came out, which is basically the ACC and the hippocampus connection, which is like the two areas in the brain in the PACE framework where we suggested these are the two key areas that should be related to information prediction errors. And what we really found here is actually then very strikingly with no correlation with curiosity enhanced memory. So there was only the midbrain and the function and the nucleus accumbens connection. But here, this connection now between the ACC and the hippocampus predicts the memory enhancements related to information prediction errors. And you see that again with both hemisphere, a bilateral ACC mask with the left hippocampus and also here with the right hippocampus. So we really see this double dissociation, basically how curiosity and information prediction errors drive memory, and this relies on these individual differences within the functional circuit. And just as a sanity check whether these effects are not driven by overall memory performance, just by people who just remember better in general. If we look at overall memory performance, we see a slightly different pictures where it's just about the PFC, the prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus predicting the information. So this is a more general effect. And also before, if we control our effects based on overall memory, the effects still stand. So when we go back here to our PACE model, to our PACE framework, we see that the two key areas that are associated with the elicitation of curiosity, they also predict the individual differences in terms of the memory enhancements of curiosity. But the information prediction errors up here, they really are bound to the functional connections within the hippocampus and anterior cingulate cortex. So asking this now behaviorally, and looking now more at development, we ask the question, how does curiosity affect memory in children and in adolescents? And this is a collaboration with Jana van der Kobber at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin. We heard already today a little bit about it, and I think we'll hear a lot more about the developmental research. And generally, it's known in terms of with studies and also theories. We know that infants and children show exploratory behavior to reduce uncertainty and to close knowledge gaps. But in this case, we really wanted to ask specifically, for example, if we use the trivia paradigm, if we really have a direct measure of curiosity and ask participants how curious they are, can we see the same learning benefits in children and adolescents? So what we did in this paradigm, we pretty much used the same paradigm as I showed you before, the trivia paradigm. This was conducted in Germany. So you can see an example question for our children's sample, for example, welcher Vogel hängt im Deutschen Bundestag? what bird is displayed in the German Bundestag, and it's ein Adler, an eagle. So now here again, we can ask again about pre-answer curiosity and also post-answer interest, how that, or the information prediction errors, how that affects memory. What we find across both groups is that curiosity affects memory positively in both groups. So you see positive effect, a significant positive effect in the children, high versus low curiosity, and high versus low curiosity in the adolescents. This is a main effect, which I think is really good news, that curiosity really affects memory in a positive way across age, or specifically in this age group from 10 to 12 and also 13 to 15 years. But then if you look at age, as a slightly different picture arises when we now look again at memory based on these information prediction errors. And for this also to show basically as an additional variable, age are plotted slightly differently. So I plot this here, for example, here in our youngest children. Here we plotted curiosity on the x-axis, so you can see from low to high curiosity standardized, and also here the probability of memory recall. And the different colors here, the different lines, are the different IPE scores. So green, the positive IPE, where we would expect memory enhancement, and then the other two, red and blue, for no IPE or even a negative IPE. And you can see here very clearly the only modulator is curiosity. So the higher the curiosity here on the x-axis, the better the memory performance. But IPE doesn't seem to do anything. If we go now slightly older kids, 2 years older, we see that these lines basically get further apart, and this effect is maximally different in our oldest age group, the 15-year-old children. So where you can see now that you can see here a clear effect when curiosity was actually low. They didn't want to see the answer to a trivia question, but then if the information is actually surprising, associated with a positive IPE score, a positive prediction error, memory performance gets better. So it seems to be that this IPE effect on memory is really driven, or is associated with development. And if you go back again to the PACE framework, I mean, there might be different explanations for it, but one idea that we postulated actually in an opinion paper together with Jana van der Kava, that this might be really related again to the neural mechanisms, where we know curiosity might be really driven, curiosity-related learning might be driven by the dopaminergic circuit that develops relatively early in development, but these IPE-related memory enhancements, they might relate later. That's associated with maturation of prefrontal cortex structures or cortex in general, for example, the anterior cingulate cortex and also prefrontal cortex. So let's go now. How much time do I have left? Do we have enough time for question? 5 minutes or so? I don't see anything. Okay, I just keep talking, but please stop me when it's getting too long. So the last question is, how does curiosity influence information seeking and exploration? So here now we are turning a little bit away from the trivia paradigm and looking a little bit more into applied settings, whether there's any validity how we measure curiosity in the lab in terms of what's happening in the real world, whether we can predict anything in the real world. So again, here, Katrin Eschmann, together with PhD student Duarte Pereira, had this idea during basically early on in the pandemic when our labs were shut and we couldn't run any brain imaging studies. So what we did here, we re-invited participants to an online questionnaire, participants that we had scanned previously and where we had already curiosity and different anxiety questionnaires. So we basically scanned them beforehand, had these questionnaires. We invited them for an online experiment where we where participants completed the previous curiosity and anxiety questionnaires again, and also an information-seeking questionnaire, how they informed themselves about COVID-related news during the first month of lockdown in March 2020. And the key item here is frequency. This is how often did you inform yourself about COVID-19 related news per day. So participants could just indicate how often, from 0 to 6, 7 times, how often they check the news. And then we also had these measures about detail, duration, and diversity of the information-seeking behavior. Just to let you know what the findings were, everything what we found is related to the frequency of information. So what we found here first behaviorally is if we just compare the curiosity scales before and during the pandemic, curiosity did not really change, which is what you would expect if you think that curiosity is really, as a personality trait, is really a stable personality trait. But as predicted, as other studies have shown, anxiety did increase during the pandemic compared to anxiety levels pre-pandemic. And what we found is that the curiosity scale, this curiosity measure, this general level of curiosity a person has, predicted the overall frequency of real-life information seeking. So you can see here, people who are generally more curious in life, they inform themselves more often. And the key question now again is, looking at the brain circuits again, we did like a very specific analysis again on the 2 key regions that are basically coming up and up again in our studies that predict curiosity, the degree of curiosity states, but also these curiosity enhanced memory effects. We found here a positive correlation. So functional connectivity between the VTA and the nucleus accumbens predicted again the frequency of real-life information seeking. So I should say that this study is not specifically about COVID or COVID-related news. What we did there is basically used an information that was prevalent during that time where we knew a lot of people would inform themselves about the pandemic situation. So this is quite interesting to see that these areas again that we see in our trivia paradigm and lab-based studies also predicts real-life information seeking out there in the world. And just to wrap up, I want to add one study, and I want to just summarize that study briefly, because I think it ties in potentially quite nicely with other work that's presented during that workshop. And that's that work is spearheaded by Dan-Lu Chen, who used to be a former postdoc in my group and is currently in China. So what Dan-Lu did, she designed a virtual reality experiment, all screen-based, where participants can explore novel rooms. And these are basic rooms, nothing really salient in there, but like in terms of the virtual reality environment, participants can explore them. And what we do in this paradigm, we also ask them about their curiosity before they enter a room. We ask them how curious they are to go into this room, to explore this room. Once they're done, after a minute or so with exploring that room, there's no time limit. We ask them again, oh, how interesting was that room actually now to you? So tapping in again what we did with the trivia paradigm about pre-room curiosity, and then also a post-room interest or a post-room information prediction error. And Dan-Lu came up with this clever idea to look at roaming entropy, basically seeing how much space do participants, so how much do people explore these rooms in terms of space, but also how much do they look around. So we have 2 different roaming entropy measures, one about space, like the path roaming entropy measure, where you can see here basically in green, I don't know if that's clearly visible on the slides, where a participant walked, and then also in terms of head direction roaming entropy. This is really the different angles, how participants look to the side, left, right, up and down to explore the environment. And this usually happens when participants stand still, that they basically look around. That's a feature of the paradigm. If they look around, they have to stand still and look around. And you can see here 4 different examples of participants, like this here, for example, participant number 14 here in the museum. You can see explores a lot in terms of space, like walks around everywhere between these different vases, as you can see them here, but also looks around a lot in the room. And you might see other indices here, of here, like in the library. This person just walks around quickly here, so relatively low path roaming entropy, but then looks around a lot more. So the head direction roaming entropy is a lot higher, and so on. You can see about different examples here. And just briefly, what we found here is basically with pre-room curiosity and post-room interest is that the path roaming entropy only predicted was predicted by the curiosity rating. So in other words, the more curious a participant was to explore a specific room, the more they explored this room. And this is quite nice because this has never been really tested before in humans. And in the animal literature, exploration is always seen as an index of curiosity. But of course, we can't really test this really easily in animals. So I think this is like the first study that really shows that curiosity indeed helps or affects exploration of novel environments. And if we look at head direction romioentropy, we see something different. So we find this double dissociation here, that the looking pattern is basically predicted by the overall interest ratings. So in other words, participants who found the room more interesting, they basically stop in the room and look around. And I remember Jan in the very first talk had this at the last slide, this example from Darwin, basically that example with bringing a snake in a bag and showing it to monkeys, where every monkey basically was like very curious and peeked in. So this would be exactly this behavior, right? If you see something in the environment that you wouldn't have expected, you stand still and you peek in, you look inside. So it seems like that curiosity is associated more with spatial exploration, whereas interest in something is associated more with visual exploration. So to quickly sum up my talk, I showed you first a data set about individual differences, and where we found that resting state functional connections between specific pace areas predict associable effects of curiosity and information prediction errors on memory. And this was related to the dopaminergic circuit, these key areas related to curiosity-related memory enhancement. And in the hippocampus, ACC connection was related to these IPE-related memory effects. I showed you developmental differences where curiosity and information prediction errors affect memory differently across child development. And this could also be, again, related, or like a potential reason for that could be related to the brain maturations of more cortical structures related to information prediction errors and their effects on memory. Then one data set was about real-life information, where we showed curiosity and resting state functional connectivity within the dopaminergic circuit predict real-life information seeking. So this is really testing these core ideas about curiosity, that curiosity elicits increased information seeking. And then in the last study, that it also elicits further exploration. So we hope that we could convince you a little bit that the PACE framework might provide a really good starting point just to structure our studies on curiosity and to stimulate new research on curiosity and curiosity-enhanced memory. And last but not least, let me say thank you to all the great people who did this work, and also to my funders, the Wellcome Trust, for funding the lab-based studies, and also the BBC and the Welsh Government for the more applied research we're currently doing in our lab. And thank you very much for your attention.